All right. Hopefully the microphone does not fall today. I'm not feeling very hopeful, but we'll see. Anyway, today we're going to cover introductions. And I will say that I think a couple of years ago, um, when I was kind of becoming a little bit more familiar with different kinds of like paper genres and things like that, introductions felt particularly hard, especially the first sentence. I think even now I don't like writing the first sentence. Um, and before we start this, I will say to you, because we're still early on in the project, it's okay if you don't start with the introduction. Like you're going to be working on it for your homework assignment today, but don't feel limited to only writing that part. Like, let's say you start working on today's assignments and you're like, this isn't working. It is okay to write something that's like part of a body paragraph, or if you just have things that you think are interesting about the piece and you want to go ahead and start writing that now. Writing is writing, right? Like the stuff that you have written, the more of it that you've got, the more of it you can work with. So if you are feeling a little bit stuck working on the introduction for today, one piece of advice that I have is maybe start on a different piece of the paper or free write for a little bit, just about the topic, to kind of warm yourself up a little bit before you start working. Let's get started. So this is like a method that comes from Helpful Professor. It's like an online resource, and you'll find stuff like this pretty often. Just like different models for writing, and they can be really useful. We're going to work with a couple of different ones that I like this semester, but this one for the introduction, you can kind of go through and read about basically um, the way that this blogger like thinks through the different sections of an introduction. But what I would say is like it's not a complete fit for what you're doing for project two, but it can be adapted really, really effectively here. And so I think it's a good like starting point for thinking about the introduction. So it's broken out. In intro is for interest, as in like the very first sentence is meant to kind of intrigue the reader and to bring them into the piece, right? You want them to read the rest of the essay. So the question is like, how do you, as early on as possible, kind of get them interested? If you've ever seen like statistics about like how long somebody looks at an article or looks at a web page before they click away, you'll find that people's attention spans are pretty short. And so you really have to kind of pack a punch as early on as possible to convince somebody that your writing stands out against the rest. You might have heard this called a hook before. It's pretty standard. Notify has to do with like notifying the reader about like what it is that you're writing about, giving them some of the background context. In this case, because you're comparing two articles, you're going to want to like introduce those articles, explain who wrote them, where were they published, how do they relate to each other. Translate and report, in my opinion, for project two are kind of one and the same thing. You're basically translating to the reader, like, why is it that you're writing this? You're reporting why it is that you're writing this. What is your purpose as the author? And in this case, you are comparing these two articles to basically explain how, when writers are using different rhetorical strategies, they're doing it to reach different audiences. And this is a great place to really hone in on the importance of scientific accommodation and to talk about, why does it matter that popular, news writers are reading through these studies and taking the time to understand the results in such a way that they can be conveyed to a larger audience. And then outline, the idea here is like, I like to think of the paper as a roadmap. And we will talk a lot about this as we move into working on your body paragraphs. But your thesis statement is an incredibly powerful place in your paper because that is where you are outlining for your readers what it is that you're going to be covering. It's where you lay out the roadmap. It's where you say, this is the argument that I'm going to make. And so it's really important to take the time to really articulate, like, what is the claim that you want to make in that thesis. So I'll show you a few examples first. We'll probably just go through one or two. And these are my comments. These are from previous semesters. This is a student sample. Um, and we'll kind of talk about how the intro framework shows up in this particular essay. So, uh, the first thing that they open with is that a person's sense of inhabiting their own body is not something that they are always secure in, which is somewhat intriguing, right? They're kind of giving a sense of like the broader topic the um, that the two articles are talking about. It's not the most detailed; like it doesn't really give me enough information to kind of signal to me as the reader that what they're going to be talking about in the next sentence is about epilepsy specifically, but it's broad enough that that following sentence does start to help to do that. And you can see that in that comment there where I'm saying, I like that you're transitioning from talking about this larger topic to then moving into that notify section where you're providing context about the article. Then they introduce the article. They say the lead author and multiple other authors of the case study, and then they have the title of it, publish their findings regarding the importance of specific regions of the brain in processing the sense of self in order to address the out-of-body experiences experienced by epilepsy patients during seizures. It's a little bit wordy, but it does what it needs to, right? It introduces the article um, and summarizes it. It gives the reader a sense of like, this is what the research was, which is helpful, right? In the same way that that popular news writer is translating the findings of that study and the overall subject matter to everyday readers, you're kind of doing the same. And though you're not doing it for like somebody who is just reading the news that day, over a cup of coffee. Um, it's not as though everybody who is an academic or is interested in rhetorical analysis that would be reading your paper, I don't know stuff about, epilepsy research. So you still have like a certain level of scientific accommodation that you're going to be performing in the introduction yourself. And then later on, they introduced that second popular article. And one of the things that's really important here is to make it very clear to your readers how the two articles relate to one another, right? A recount of the study by one of the authors, as well as an outside perspective, isn't like you can see that they're saying this is how this NPR article relates to the scholarly article. And then they move into talking a little bit about like why does the relationship between these two articles matter? And that you can see them start to lead into that thesis statement. They're saying that the language and rhetoric of the two articles display how scholarly and popular articles differ despite approaching the same topic. Great. Now we're talking a little bit about scientific accommodation. How does it relate to rhetorical strategies? And it builds up to that last sentence, which has the thesis statement. We can look at one more example. This, I would say, is an interesting first sentence. Roughly 30,000 years ago, mankind was introduced to a new best friend. That's fun, right? I mean, it's like it invokes a very popular trope. It's general enough that it gives you a sense that okay, we're talking about dogs, right? And it gives you that kind of it's general enough to give you a little bit of intrigue about like okay, so what? Like what's going to come next? Why are we talking about this? And those are the kinds of questions that you want to evoke in your readers. I also will tell you one of the things that I especially like about this paper is, and you can see it in that feedback, is that they build on that hook a little bit. They start to dig into the topic a little bit more, which you're welcome to do, right? It's okay to take like, 1 to 3 sentences before you introduce the two articles if you want. That hook or interest section can be more than one sentence. And so I like that they build on it. They say, desperate for a means of survival, humans turn to canines for aid in the necessary fields of hunting and gathering. So they're providing a little bit of context about the subject matter, which is again kind of part of that process of your own engaging with the scientific accommodation process. So Um, I wanted to just kind of walk through a few of these because it gives you, again, a sense of like what it means to see how this framework has been used for this project in particular. Please do not open with a rhetorical question. Please don't do that. And don't use them in your essay overall. The reason that I recommend this is because I cannot think of an instance where I've seen somebody use a rhetorical question and it wouldn't have been stronger to rephrase and answer that question instead for the readers. So, for example, if you were writing about like PFAs and these like forever chemicals that there are concerns about the presence of them in our drinking water supplies. Let's say that was the topic of the research article that you were discussing, right? If you were to answer, or sorry, if you were to open your paper with a sentence like, what would it mean if, what would it mean if we had all of these forever chemicals in our water? What kind of effect would that have on people's health? Right? Let's say that's the first thing that you want to write. My recommendation would be to instead answer the question, right? And so that instead would look like, forever chemicals have started to become a major concern for people's health because of X, Y, and Z, right? That's a stronger opening sentence to say, what if, or imagine, or, think like what could happen if. Those kinds of things are not going to be as strong as if you were to just instead try answering that question or rephrasing it as an answer to that question and stating the idea to your readers directly. So, in the drafting process, again, it is okay if you start out by writing a rhetorical question. If that's what gets your foot in the door, do it, right? But then take a step back and answer the question and see where that potentially leads you. Because I think a lot of the time it tends to be stronger. So, with that, just kind of go through the attendance and homework assignment. It's meant to help you kind of like lead you through the different sections of the introduction and guide you in starting that draft. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. And I will see you at our next class.